Welcome everyone to today's webinar. I am Mackenzie Bean with Becker's Hospital Review. We will begin today's webinar with a presentation, and we'll have time at the end of the hour for a question and answer session. You can submit any questions you have throughout the webinar by typing them into your control panel in the space labeled Enter a Question for Staff and clicking Send. We are looking forward to hearing your questions. We will also have a series of audience polling questions during today's webinar. When we reach each poll slide, the poll question will pop up automatically on your screen. Our speakers will give a few seconds for you to select an answer from the options on your screen and click Submit. Thank you in advance for your participation. Today's session is being recorded and will be available after the event. In about a week following the webinar, we'll be sending all registrants a copy of the presentation to the email you used to register. At this time, it is now my pleasure to start today's webinar by introducing our presenters. Jackie Calavo is Chief Nursing Officer at West Penn Hospital, part of Allegheny Health Network. Jackie is an executive nurse leader with 35 years of progressive clinical, administrative, and operational experience. Prior to her role as CNO, she served as West Penn Hospital's Director of Nursing and Magnet Program Director. She has presented at several national conference forums, including the ANCC National Magnet Conference and the National Nurses Association Quality Conference. She has been selected by the American Nurses Credentialing Center as a reviewer for the National Magnet Nurse of the Year Awards program. In 2015, Jackie was named the American Nurses Association Foundation's Nurse of the Year, and in 2018 was chosen by Pittsburgh Magazine as Nurse Executive of the Year. Adele Webb is Assistant Dean of External Relationships and Partnerships at Capella University School of Nursing and Health Sciences. Over the last 25 years, Adele has worked worldwide to build nurse capacity for treatment of communicable and non-communicable diseases. She has received extensive funding for her international work and has published her findings in several refereed journals. She's also contributed to WHO guidelines, testified to the Institute of Medicine, and given testimony to the White House on nursing workforce issues. For her work, Adele has received numerous awards, including induction as a fellow in the American Academy of Nursing. At this time, I am pleased to turn the floor over to Jackie to begin today's presentation.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. This is Jacqueline Calavo, and please forgive me, I do have a little bit of a raspy voice. I'm getting over a cold. So talk about resilience, which we will talk about today. It's so important that we encourage all nurses and our supporting staff to be as resilient as they can be. Our learning objectives for today are threefold today. Understand well-being for nurses and what it entails. Understand why nurse well-being matters. Learn how to support well-being for nurses. Next slide, please. So as they mentioned, we're going to do a series of polling questions. Our first polling question, what job titles do we have in our audience with us today? And please select one. Okay, so our results are on the screen in front of you. And as usual with nurses, as we perform many roles, we seem to have a nice variety in our audience today. So we welcome all of you as executive leaders, nurse managers, nurse educators, clinical nurses, probably in a variety of roles. And if you notice other, 21%, we have probably nurses in other roles, or we have health providers that assist nurses or work in the healthcare field as our other population today. And I just want to clarify, as I do with everyone I work with, you're not just other, because we are a team and we are collaborative and we need all of us to provide the best possible patient outcomes. Next slide. So for part one of our presentation today, we're going to talk a little bit about understanding well-being for nurses. Next slide. I believe everyone understands that nurses and nurse leaders must thrive in the face of daily stressors. They're very unique not only to our profession, but unique to the roles that each and every one of you on our webinar today probably service in. And, you know, there is no day that goes by without some form of stressor or stress in everything we do all day long. So how are we able to provide effective care to our patients if we ourselves are stressed? So we have to find ways within ourselves and self-reflect in order to be able to contribute to the overall success of our facilities. Next slide, please. So what constitute a nurse's daily stressors? We have a few things listed here, but I know that you probably are sitting there thinking of many, many other things. But to name a few, a constantly changing work environment. We all know that the only constant is change, and our work environments are constantly changing, not only daily, but weekly and in front of our very eyes. We are faced as nurses and as nurse leaders with staffing challenges every day. I'm sure all of you experience in your facilities and in your organizations. We unfortunately are going through a little bit of a nursing shortage, if you will. I'm not sure if you're all experiencing it in all states. I'm in the state of Pennsylvania, and we definitely have a nursing shortage. So we work very hard in our facilities here at Allegheny Health Network to find innovative and creative ways to help our staff, help each other to give better care by helping them remove the barriers to their staffing challenges. When staffing is short and we experiencing continued challenge, I know that we all see unforeseen and we can see negative patient outcomes, which none of us want to see. So what does this mean? Next slide. All of us as nurses work in an environment that's constantly changing, and we talked about how this is in a variety of ways. We all have a variety of care needs that we have to provide our patients. We have responsibilities that are assigned, and then we have the unexpected that comes our way every day. So what do these include? We have sicker patients at home. We deal with length of stay management in our facilities. We all know there's a focus on length of stay to keep the patient in the hospital less time for many reasons, but our patients are safer and more comfortable in their homes, and we want to get them home as soon as we can. However, they are in some very complex inpatient situations that must continually evolve, and we must provide them adequate resources at home to keep their care on a continuum and going in the right direction, or as we all know, they'll end up in our hospitals with readmissions. So as we continue to confront our staffing challenges and hire new nurses, younger nurses are coming into our profession. I don't know about all of you, but in the organization where I work, with the nursing shortage and with nurses coming out of nursing school, we have a workforce at my facility of about 60% millennials. So those of us that have been in the profession, it's our role and our job to continually educate and mentor these nurses, these new nurses, who are caring for very complex patients, transitioning their care to home, ensuring that they have follow-up, understand their care, understand their medications, and help keep them safe at home so they continue to improve. It's very important to establish processes through shared governance, through all of our roles as nurses on committees and other collaborative teams and groups. Many of us in leadership roles have not been directly at the bedside, and I tell nurses every day, I just came from a new hire orientation with a group of nurses, and they want to know what I do every day, and I spoke to them, but I told them I'm here to help you remove barriers to give better care. It's not about myself as the CNO and a leader. It's about all of the nurses and the nursing assistants and the caregivers at the bedside. All of you are the lifeline to our patients, and we rely on you to tell us what we need to do better to help make your job better, to better care for our patients. Next slide. So meanwhile, staffing challenges comes in many forms. Frequent staff turnover is huge, and open positions that are difficult to fill. Both of these are very challenged to all of us. There are challenges every day, from the frontline staff who's the charge nurse trying to cover assignments, to all of us in nursing leadership who are creating daily programs and innovative ways and creative ways and challenging each other as leaders to come up with creative ideas to help tackle our staffing challenges. The greatest thing that I tell my teams are, and I'll be brief, but I am all about patient safety. And if any of you on the line have ever heard of the book, Why Hospitals Should Fly, by John Nance, it's a very, very easy read, but very, very powerful and very informative. The reason I mention it is our job to keep our patients safe. And if any of you have a severe fear of flying, then I understand you might not agree with my situation. However, we all step on the planes every day thinking we're going on vacation, never thinking we are not going to arrive at our destination, whether it be the Caribbean or Disney. We put our headphones in, we sit back, and we trust those airline pilots. In hospitals, if you think about it, we all want to chase zero every day. We want zero harm to our patients. But unfortunately, falls occur, pressure ulcers occur, med errors do occur. Even though we work very, very hard and very diligently to keep our patients safe, we crash planes in hospitals every day. So yes, that's a metaphor, but it troubles me that they say in the book, a piece of luggage gets to its destination and is safer than a patient in our hospitals. I take that very seriously. It is our job as nurses to remove barriers, tackle these challenges, and keep our patients safe. So we have to confront these staffing challenges and figure out how to deal with it. Next slide. I'll give you a very quick example, and I have many. So when you have my contact information, I'm happy to help anybody through anything. But I'll give you one quick example. Cardiac catheterization lab here at West Penn Hospital. This is an area where we need qualified nurses. We cannot put new grads in this area. So when there's turnover and when these nurses go on to become nurse anesthetists or nurse practitioners, we all promote professional development. We want our nurses to grow and develop. So as we have turnover in these areas, this is one nursing position truly that is very difficult to fill. Nurses go on to have babies and small children, and when they do start their families, the one barrier that they have is being on call because they can't be called in and leave their children at home. So recently, in the last several months, we've had some turnover, and it was for promotions, moving out of state. It wasn't because they didn't like where they were working, but it was very difficult. So we had to come up with a creative idea. We rallied with our nurse managers. We created a training program, and we really asked everybody to give a little bit extra, and we got through it. We were able to successfully hire nurses. We are not turning away any patients. We are able to keep up with our volume, but it is constantly keeping our eye on the ball to train new nurses and to try to deal with the unforeseen that happens so we can keep our patients safe and keep the area staffed. Next slide. So I already spoke a little bit about unforeseen negative patient outcomes. Those are the things that we as nurse leaders follow every day. Our NDNQI nurse-sensitive indicators, ventilator-associated pneumonias, CLABSIs, CAUTIs, falls, HAPUs, surgical site infections. All of these complications occur to patients while in our care. Many survive. Many do have unforeseen events. Many of them come with harm, although we don't want them to. But these patients that are in our condition, in our care may develop conditions that worsen during their time with us. They come to us at their most vulnerable. They come to us and acquire an infection that they didn't anticipate having, or they're given a diagnosis that they weren't anticipating, or they have a reaction to a medication. So it's our job to recognize the unforeseen, deal with it the best way we know how, and I encourage nurses all the time to utilize your voice, work together in teams, strive to have a just culture. If anything has occurred and it's a negative, please, I encourage you to report it, discuss it. Our healthcare environments need to be non-punitive so we can make it better, not only for the staff, but for our patients. Next slide. So I know that you all would agree that there's many demands in our profession. Nurses must define their own well-being through their resilience to meet these daily challenges. So what is resilience? Resilience is many things to different people. Resilience for me may be going home and taking my dog for a walk. So you need to find what works best for you. Some of you may find reading a book on the beach will give you resilience to come back to work next week. But then there's the nurse that can't stand sand between their toes, and for them, their vacations are in the winter, and they like to fly down a ski slope and meet that challenge head on. So I encourage you to think about it, be very mindful, and I tell my nurses, if you seek resilience and you have some self-reflection, think about what you do every day. What brings you back to work? What keeps you up at night? How can you help deal with those feelings of how we can do things better? And I guarantee you, if you find some self-reflection and some resilience, you will be better today than you were the day before. And when you find resilience, success will find you. Next slide. I kind of talked a little bit about this already. Nurse leaders need to recognize that their team's energy and emotional reservoirs must remain replenished in order to come to work each day. This is what I mean about thinking about your own inner reflection, your resilience. Think about your own emotional intelligence. What makes us come back to work every day ready and eager to do their jobs? I can sit here and tell you I absolutely love my job. I never thought I would be a chief nurse, but it is the absolute best job I've ever had. I tell my nurses I try to never ask them to do anything I wouldn't do. I'm back in school for my doctorate. I'm a CNO. I'm blessed to be a CNO in a 3-time Magnet organization who I tell nurses every day, be better today than you were the day before. Seek additional professional development. Every day we should be learning. We are lifelong learners as caregivers and nurses. Next slide. Additional consideration that we can talk about for nurses' well-being. I think nurses tend to come into nursing as a second profession. Through the years, if you've been in nursing as long as I have, we have seen nurses seek a nursing education as a second career. They've been in industry and steel workers and different other professions where those organizations and factories and industries are closed down and they needed to seek a different profession. Some of them I hire ask, why didn't I do this when I was 20 or 22? And they absolutely love the profession that they've now chosen as a second profession. Therefore, they expect to be able to have an amount of control over their work environment, and that's not always feasible. Next slide. Like anyone, many of us as nurses may be going through their own personal and financial issues, be it a divorce, a sick parent or a child, housing issues, many other concerns. I use my personal example that I went through in the last 2 years with a very elderly father who had a stroke and needed to have care rendered to him. He landed in my own hospital with pneumonia in critical care, and he just was never the same after that. And he was so debilitated that he ended up having to be in a personal care home, a skilled facility, something that he never would have wanted. And, you know, I questioned what could I have done better, because both my mother and I are nurses, and it just seems odd that when we're nurses, we couldn't even provide the care that he needed because he needed so much care. So when you think about it, if you're having a rough day, something is happening with everyone all around us. It even may be happening to you. So when I say that, I just met with a group of staff last week who was really having a rough time of it. Staffing was challenged. You know, they've had some issues with their staffing. A staff member was going through a divorce. Somebody was dealing with a sick child. We had call-offs, and it was a really rough day. I pulled them all together. I said, just pause for a moment and think about this. We will get through this. How can I help you? None of you standing here today has cancer. None of you are down on our oncology unit dying of leukemia, and we can get through this. We have to pause, we have to deep breathe, and we have to find our own resilience to get through the rest of the day. So I think that's an example of me being a transformational leader with my teams. It's very, very imperative that as nurse leaders, we are transformational leaders. And most importantly, we are very mindful of those on our staff. We must communicate and be transparent. And one of the most important things we can do is be an active listener. I try to teach all of our leaders when they meet with their teams to listen to their staff, help them resolve their issues. And always as a nurse leader, if we can, we should be the last to speak after we listen to our staff. Next slide. So I think it's very imperative that nurse leaders are able to ascertain what their staff needs in order to feel supported. By that I mean the hallmarks of being a transformational leader are being visible and accessible, round on the units, round without an agenda, say, how may I help you today? I will tell my staff, you know, I've been away from the bedside, but I certainly can help you care for a patient. I will even come here and take a patient assignment, but you got to chart an Epic for me because I haven't charted in years. So that's an example of teamwork, but it's just so important that we're mindful of what our staff is going through every day. I think it will improve their own resilience. It will improve teamwork and collaboration. And I think over time, if we do these things and we help our nurses with their own well-being and help them find ways to find resilience, I think we'll see a lower turnover rate and we will see a greater retention rate and hopefully an improvement in our staff satisfaction and our patient outcomes. That would be the goal. Next slide. So we have another polling question. What is the most prevalent daily stressor that the nurses at your organization routinely experience? Okay, this is Jackie again. Not surprising. I think we all are faced every day with nursing turnover and absence of work-life balance. So that right there, 37% absence of work-life balance, gives meaning to why mindfulness and resiliency is so very important. So I hope all of you think about that and are able to find your own resilience and what works best for you, even if it's a minute a day, if you pause and think about that. So I'm going to turn it over now to Adele.
Hi, thank you, Jackie, so much. And if you'll advance the slide, you can see that during this section, we're going to talk about why it matters. So Jackie, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts about resilience and some of the stresses that nurses face every day. But let's think about, why does it matter? What are the outcomes that we're looking for, and how does a nurse's stress and lack of well-being or resilience affect that? So if you want to advance the slide, we know that nurse well-being matters not just to the individual nurse. It matters to the department, the team, the institution, but it matters to nursing overall. If you think about this, is I think our 18th year running of being the most trusted profession, and some of that relates back to the fact of the quality of care that we give. But research shows that the higher level of well-being the nurse has, the higher level actually the level of patient satisfaction, which is interesting with that trickle-down effect, and then the higher satisfaction the nurse has too. So it affects for the nurse their ability to perform their work in an effective and meaningful way. For the department, it affects them being an effective team member, and for the institution, it affects patient outcomes. So better patient outcomes are reflected by nurses who are more resilient and have a feeling really of balance and joy and harmony in their work. There are fewer medical errors and higher patient satisfaction, less turnover. So if you want to advance the slide, you can see that as nurse leaders, we really need to pay attention to both nurse and patient satisfaction, because both of those really reflect on our ability to have an improved experience for the patient. And you know now, with hospitals being able to advertise and people making decisions about where they're going to go, those patient satisfaction scores really matter. You can advance the slide. Currently, the American Nurses Association has a campaign called Healthy Nurse, Healthy You. This was launched in 2017, and it really was in recognition of something that came out from OSHA that said that healthcare professions are some of the most difficult and dangerous professions that we can pick from. So if you think about in your nursing career, exposure to different kinds of diseases, lateral violence, bullying from your colleagues, violence from patients, which is increasing, you can see that keeping the nurse healthy and happy in her position is something that's of paramount importance. But what they're saying is they want to increase the health of the nation, and they're going to increase the health of the nation by actually increasing the health of the nurse. You can move the slide. So it's difficult to actually measure a nurse's well-being, and like Jackie said, it can change. You know, everybody has something, right? And so you have a sick kid at home, or, you know, there's something that you're missing because you're working that's going to affect your well-being. But overall, the way to measure well-being as a whole is to look at retention at the hospital. So in spite of all the interventions we've done to affect work-life balance and well-being, our levels of attrition are increasing. So 3 years ago, we had about 14% attrition of our nurses. Now we're up to 17%. And given that it costs about $100,000 to replace a nurse, depending on the level of care they provide and where you're at in the country, you can see that retaining a nurse can have a big effect on your budget and your ability to do things for not only the nurses, but for your patients. Next slide. So when nurses feel stressed in their position, you can see that it affects their health. And as their health is affected, it leads to more medical errors. They perform their job less effectively. They start bullying. So often when you're under stress, you kind of revert back to those old behaviors, almost those high school cliquey behaviors that cause you to bully your colleagues, and your patient satisfaction decreases. So next slide. Nurses say, and as Jackie talked about, they're stressed because they have no work-life balance. But work-life balance is an interesting concept, because never are you going to have an equal amount of time for everything in your life. So if you think about, you have work, and you have home, and you have family, and maybe children, maybe your church, community, maybe a second job, how do you distribute that equally? And you can see that balance in a lot of ways is bunk. I mean, you're never going to have that balance. But what you can have are ways to find harmony and joy in your work. And you do that through resilience. So resilience is really the fact that you have the opportunity to be present. So to be where you need to be, when you need to be there, and not be thinking about other things that are happening in your life. So an exit interviews, a lot of times what nurses say is this is the reason that they're leaving their position. but they move into a new position and they find that it's really the same. So rather than lose the nurses, what we need to do are think about ways to help them find that joy and harmony, get the balance they need, and stay in their positions. So you can advance the slide. So when you think about what happens when a nurse starts thinking about leaving, they become less invested in their work. So they already have their eye on their next position. So it affects really their outcome, but not just their outcome, but their team. So now their team is going to practice short, one person. They're going to be orienting a new person. So you're losing that organizational history, and you're losing the experience and the teamwork. So it really matters when you have a nurse leave, especially one with experience. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see that it matters. There we go. No matter what level the nurse is. So when you think about nurse managers, nursing assistants, patient care assistants, your CNO, anytime a nurse leaves, it affects patient care. It affects outcomes for the team, outcomes on the floor, certainly outcomes for the patient, and outcomes for the organization. So finding ways to build that resilience and encourage well-being in our nurses is of paramount importance as we keep people in the positions that they're in. Next slide. So nurse well-being really bubbles up. So when you think about the nurse at the bedside, you can see that their well-being bubbles up to the team, to the department or the floor, and to the organization. So it's better patient outcomes are certainly the goal. Patients come to the hospital really for nursing care. You know, a lot of care that they can get at home is now happening, or a lot of care they used to get in the hospital is now happening at home. But nurses are really on the front lines of the care that the people come to the hospital for. So we have to have a high level of well-being in order to provide the best environment that we can. You've probably heard you need to fill your cup before you can fill someone else's. So really having the opportunity in your position to fill your cup so that that can trickle down then to your patients. And if you go to the next slide, you can see that it matters because, as I mentioned before, in this age of consumerism, really people can make decisions about where they go. Patient satisfaction scores are posted on the website. So if you're making a decision about the care you're going to get, wouldn't you go to the place where the patients were happy? And because they have the opportunity to see that, and not just on their website, but think about social media and people posting about their experiences on Facebook or tweeting or so on. So the information is available to everyone and gets out very quickly. And if you go to the next slide, again, this really talks about people making the choice of where they want to go. And so when you have nurses that are unhappy, that are not resilient, that don't have well-being, it can affect actually not just the floor or the department or the nurse, but the whole institution. If you go to the next slide, you'll see that unhappy nurses commit more errors, and this is supported in the literature. So when nurses are unhappy, they tend to lose focus, and as they lose focus, they could run the risk of having more medical errors, adverse events, and that certainly affects the hospital overall. It's very expensive, and it could affect accreditation. So we have a polling question now. At your organization, nurse turnover is most often attributed to, and we'll give you a few minutes to answer that. So interesting, stressful schedules comes up as the top. And when we think about the opportunity for self-scheduling, flexible scheduling, 12-hour shifts, and so on, you can see how that's often concerning. Also thinking about mandatory overtime or filling in when staff's not there. And then lack of mentorship. And I think that's very interesting because we have an opportunity as nurses, as seasoned nurses, to be that mentor to nurses that come in, and not necessarily millennials, because not all nurses that come in are millennials. Some people come in as a second degree or a second position. So we have a lot of work to do as managers and organizations thinking about scheduling, but as personally, as nurses, taking the opportunity to mentor new nurses as they come in. I'm going to turn this back to Jackie, and she's going to talk about how to support well-being for nurses.
Thank you, Adele. Next slide. So how do we support our nurses in ways that ensure that they have the emotional reservoirs to get through the demands of their daily work life? I think that's probably different for nurses in every organization and different depending on the type of unit they work through and work on, but we have to help them through that. Next slide. We also need to make sure they find fulfillment in their work and that they are engaged with their patients and coworkers. And one of the ways that we can do this, I believe, is through nurse leadership support and ensuring they have the most positive work environments that we can sustain for them. Next slide. So one of the keys to this support is to provide the tools they need to achieve a better sense of well-being. A couple we have listed here is a better managed work environment and schedule to the best of our ability, but this is the first thing that is impacted when we do have turnover. That's why it's so important to manage it. Access to professional growth and opportunities through education. So I'm sure many of you are back in school. I'm back in school myself, and we do promote professional growth and development to the best of our ability through our hospitals. It's important to have resources in tuition reimbursement and to help them find that work-life balance so they can continue their education. Next slide. As I mentioned, managing their work and environment and schedule. As hospitals, we must take staffing decisions based on the needs of each department. This sometimes is a moving target every 2 hours, every 4 hours. For example, a team can add LPNs in order to round out the coverage of the team. We did this recently on our acute rehab unit, but as you know, LPNs we struggle with staffing because LPNs can't work on every unit based on the patient population. Some units we can't even use nursing assistant, and it has to be the RN that takes care of the patients. If we add other caregivers, this does alleviate stress as the whole department is able to fully focus on their own responsibilities. Next slide. So it's very difficult sometimes to manage our work environments and schedules to the best of our ability, but I ask people all the time, nothing is out of the question if you have a better idea. For example, as it says here, if you think starting at 6 a.m. works better than 7 a.m., then we certainly can try it. Depending on the needs of the team, if we can make the team more efficient and function in a better way to better care for our patients, then it's absolutely worth it. Next slide. The key is that nurse leaders should make adjustments where they can. And again, I have to say, it really is helpful if we hear from the frontline caregivers and we can discuss their needs, because often it's not always the leader that has the answer. And we need to listen to our staff because they often have great ideas that will help meet their needs as well as improve our environments. Next slide. So how can we help our staff have access to professional growth opportunities through education? There's nothing more important than education. As I mentioned before, as nurses, we are lifelong learners. Continuing our education allows nurses or anyone seeking education to validate what they already know, grow their competencies, grow their skills, give more context to their skills, and in the end, as we take our knowledge into our work environments, it creates better patient outcomes. Next slide. Increased education also gives nurses more satisfaction in their careers. Nurses are very, very ambitious, very dedicated people. Looking for their next position, they often then go into a specialty. They want to know their job is evolving and they can do today. And what they do today, they won't be doing forever. They want to change and grow and to be able to contribute more. Next slide. So the question is, how do we keep nurses at our organization while making them feel supported and show that their career is full of possibilities? Next slide. I think we can do this by providing them with access to additional education in a way that truly can be synergistic with their busy schedules. Next slide. So access to growth and opportunities through education. Tuition reimbursement is a huge factor. It plays a large role. Many of our nurses often have children in college themselves, so they say, how can I go to school at the same time? Being in school is not easy because of our work schedule is very demanding, and we all have so much going on around us every day in our personal lives. Next slide. By removing financial barriers, I know institutions can make sure that getting an education is a little bit easier for their nursing staff. Some organizations provide very much tuition reimbursement, many other optional programs. Flexibility, online education is very essential. Next. Next slide. With additional degrees, nurses have the tools to do the job they want to do in a very safe and effective manner. They can be the best professional version of themselves. We never should stop learning. We can always learn more about theory and skills and gain the ability to adapt to additional situations. Next slide. So therefore, at Capella, we've seen the particular impact on our programs that our programs have on nurses' well-being. A recent Gallup report found that Capella graduates who worked for Capella Healthcare Partners while obtaining their degrees are more likely than non-traditional college graduates nationally to be thriving in each element of well-being as defined by Gallup. Next slide.
Thank you, Jackie. So this is Adele, so I'm going to jump in for just a minute and talk about Capella. We have a program called FlexPass that offers you the opportunity to really select a period of time in where you can register for 2 classes at a time and as many classes as you can take during that period of time, where you set your own deadlines, and it's completely flexible. It leads to your opportunity to really control the environment around the class that you're taking. As a result of that, we looked at our Capella grads, and you can see that well-being among Capella undergraduate and graduate degree holders in a Gallup poll came out as stronger in every section. So under purpose, social, financial, community, physical, and so on, you can see that Capella grads had higher levels of well-being. I think this speaks very closely to the fact that we have a flexible program that allows you to kind of live your life as you make decisions about school. Next slide. You can also see that in the same report, Capella nursing grads who earned their degree we looked at 3 things really: confidence in your career, improved leadership skills, and performance at work. And you can see across the board a high number of our graduates and their employers felt that 79% agreed or strongly agreed that they were more confident in their careers because of their education at Capella. 76% either agreed or strongly agreed that their leadership skills had improved. So important when you think about the reasons that you're getting your degree, why you're getting that BSN, why you're getting that MSN, certainly to improve your leadership skills. And then 75% agreed or strongly agreed that their performance at work improved. So again, how important is that to the organization to support an educational program that has as an outcome better performance at work? Next slide. So let's look at the way that specific degrees can affect a nurse's career. Think about where you are now. Think about your next step. Is it getting your bachelor's? Is it moving on to a master's degree, or is it starting to think about your DNP? And what does that mean for you? And how will your career change as you pursue higher education? So next slide. So BSN nurses, when you moved from, say, an ADN or a diploma program and get your BSN, what you're really studying is clinical judgment, critical thinking, the theory behind the practice. So you move from being a functional doer or more task-oriented to really being a strategic thinker, really being viewed as that leader at the bedside. So it's so important as you move to think about the context of not just what you're doing, but why you're doing it. And you attain that through your education that you work towards your BSN. Next slide. So MSN nurses really specialize in a study area. So if those of you, many of you may have your master's or may be working towards it, but what you know is that you pick that area that is of interest to you. And while you take some general courses that everyone takes related to theory and so on, you really focus on that area of nursing that you enjoy. So for instance, administration or education or care coordination. So you really grow further into a leadership role around a specific area that's important to you. And so it really builds on your bachelor's education, and it helps deepen your knowledge, kind of strengthen you as that strategic thinker and leader. And then on the next slide, you'll see that at the DNP, what you're really doing now is finding ways to create and build new knowledge. So you're not just taking things that you've learned in your bachelor's and master's, but you're really looking at theory and the creation of new knowledge and bridging that over, helping translate it for some of the new nurses, helping them grow in their careers. So it's really your ability to not just affect the work you're doing or the work maybe to the people who report to you or on your team, but this is really the opportunity to affect the organization itself and the profession itself. So it's a very high level opportunity to build on your career, theory, research, leadership, and really affect nursing as a profession. So next slide. We want to leave some time here at the end for questions, but what we know and what we hope you've learned today is that nurses and nurse leaders really have to thrive in the face of daily stressors, and not just stressors at work, but stressors in life. So if you just think about what we talked about, you know, when you think about that work-life balance and everything that's coming at you all the time, can you really balance it? Stressors from all areas of your life. So how do we make our nurses, how do we help our nurses thrive? How do we as nurse leaders thrive when we're trying to fill the cup of others and our cup isn't full? But we must think of ways to do that. We have to be able to thrive in our positions so that we can provide effective care and contribute to the success of not just our patient outcomes, but also how we feel about our job, our well-being, our health, our department, our organization, and nursing as a profession. So in conclusion, we have to look at, and I think there's one more slide here, or maybe two. Next slide. So we have to pay attention to not just nurse satisfaction, but patient satisfaction as well. And really look at those surveys and see what are the ways that we can affect those outcomes. Because if we don't do it, we're going to negatively affect our nurses and our nursing teams. We're going to have increased attrition, which not only is expensive, but affects patient outcomes and leads to a higher level of adverse events. It also takes away our organizational history and our opportunity to really pass down that organizational knowledge to our new nurses. And next slide. So as we think about ways to do that, we need to remember that continuing education and professional development are really crucial to what we're trying to do in our institutions. This aligns very closely with AACN's new position statement, which really talks about providing those pathways, those opportunities to move nurses up in their levels of education. So from associate and diploma into baccalaureate, or an entry-level master's degree, baccalaureate to master's, and so on. And so our last slide is on a local level. We know that increased education supports the well-being of our nursing staff, and that contributes to their professional success and the success of the organization. So we have one last polling slide, if you'll pull that up. How does your organization currently prioritize nursing education? Excellent. So you can see that you have multiple education partners. You know, that's a real advantage because you have the opportunity to make some informed choices. with the partnerships that you have. Unsure, I would really recommend that you go to HR or go to your nursing professional development committee and try and find out what opportunities exist for you, because it's really a chance for you to start to fill your cup. And then not currently a priority, I just wonder, you know, maybe you don't know, maybe there are ways to find out. And if it's not, then how do you affect that? And how do you see that it matters and start to bring that forward? So I thank you so much for your attention for this webinar, and I'm going to turn it over, I think, to Erin, who is going to take questions.
Great, thank you so much, Jackie and Adele. We'll now begin today's question and answer session. Please submit any questions you have by typing them into your control panel in the space labeled Enter a Question for Staff and clicking Send. We'll try to get through as many questions as we have time for. The first question is from an audience member who wants to know, do you have any tangible examples of an intervention improving well-being on a unit?
Hi, this is Jackie. I think I can take that question. We can do it in a variety of ways. One of the things that we are working to improve is we are having a wellness room where somebody can just go and take their break and sit and relax, maybe read a chapter in a book or just put their earbuds in for 10 minutes. But it's very important sometimes that they have the ability to just step away from the unit, ask somebody to cover their assignment while they take a 10-minute break. Another thing we can do is have a huddle and ask how we can help each other. And I know that our CEO happens to be a nurse as well, so I know that he and I have gone up to the unit and we've taken them lunch or we've taken them coffee and just letting them know that we're there to support them.
Great, thank you so much, Jackie. The next question is from an audience member who's talking about how the transition to practice for nurses can be a pretty stressful journey. So she's asking, do you think that a nurse residency program is a good platform to improve or support resilience?
I can start with that, and I'm sure Jackie will want to chime in, especially from her perspective at her organization. But absolutely, the Future of Medicine report, or the Future of Nursing report that came out of the Institute of Medicine, now the National Academy of Medicine, one of their big initiatives were transition to practice programs, because it provides the nurse the opportunity to kind of come in gently into the new position and into the new opportunity that they've taken into your organization. And so well-structured transition to practice programs are absolutely essential to providing that mentorship. But a recommendation that's in the literature is when that transition to practice program is over, you need to think about what happens next, because really transition into the profession is not over. And so how do you provide that mentor and encourage mentorship once they finish that formal program? So Jackie, I don't know if you have another perspective you'd like to add.
Thank you, Adele. I definitely agree with what you had just stated. But one of the things that I've seen with our new nurses is, you know, they come into the practice and they're somewhat quiet and can be, you know, timid. And I think the nurse residency program not only helps them understand best practices and truly help them understand why they do what they do, but I think it helps them open up, work better as a team, gain relationships and partnerships, and then I think they do understand and accept mentoring as they continue in their career. I've seen such great things happen with our residency program.
Wonderful. Thank you both for sharing your insights on that question. Another audience member wants to know, how do you provide work-life balance for your leaders?
This is Jackie. I guess I'll take that one. And I can speak to what we do here, but, you know, it's very, very important to try and find work-life balance. We have to be a role model for those that we ask to seek work-life balance as well. One of the things that we do here is we promote that nurses go back to school. So as a nurse leader, you know, it's very hard to not do your day job and do your schoolwork. So we provide time, quiet time in our library, or for nurse leaders to have another nurse leader cover their unit for the day, and they can take the time and go work on their schoolwork or research the literature or do what they have to do. Some people really appreciate it for 2 hours. Some people do it for 4 hours. And that's time that they don't get to do unless we help them make that happen.
I agree, Jackie. And I think, too, that we have to think about opportunities for growth within their position as well. So opportunities to go to maybe other units and observe what goes on there, opportunities for flexible scheduling, having time off. I think there are a lot of things that we can do. One of the things that I realized I was doing until my staff told me is I would, on Sunday when I had time, I would just send out 1 million emails. Well, then the staff said they felt pressure to respond because I was sending them something and they thought they had to respond. And so I was putting enormous amount of stress on them when all I was trying to do was get my work done when I had time. So I started changing my emails so they would send on Monday morning so I could still write them on Sunday, but send them on Monday. And that way was an opportunity for me to really role model that work-life balance and that I did not expect them to respond on Sunday.
Excellent example. I agree. We went through that here too, but that's a perfect example.
Wonderful. And it looks like we have time for one last question. This audience member writes, as a millennial, what would I be expecting with nurse-to-nurse and mentorship from nurse leaders coming out of nursing school?
This is Jackie. I think one of the best things that they can do is be in the nurse residency program. They're paired with their nursing educator there, and they work with a team to do their evidence-based practice project, and then that establishes a mentor going forward as well. I think that is so key. At our organization, we ask all of our new grads to participate in that and our new nurses, and I think that's one of the most effective ways to help them establish a mentor relationship going forward. When we hire experienced nurses, I think it's very important also to not assume that they can just fly on their own, as we say. I think some of them change complete units. For example, somebody may come from adult critical care and want to do neonatal intensive care. So while they know the theory and the concepts and best practices of critical care, the patient happens to be smaller, things are very, very different. And having a mentor in those types of situations are very key as well to their success.
You know, that's a good point, Jackie, and it makes me think about Patricia Benner's work on novice to expert and understanding that we could be an expert absolutely in one area, but when we change to a new position, we have to understand we go back to that novice. And when we do that, we really need a mentor and able to guide us to not just the skills, but also the theory behind the work that we're doing.
Agree. And I talk about that very model about Pat Benner when I do new hire orientations as well. Agree. Because they feel that they are so well versed in emergency room or adult critical care and they make a huge change, and that's okay, but they have to be mentored as well.
Wonderful. Before we go ahead and end the presentation, I just want to turn the floor back over to you, Jackie and Adele, to see if you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share.
This is Jackie. I just would like to thank everybody for your attention today and joining our webinar. I hope if you are not in school that this helped you understand why it's important to continue your education and take a moment and find your own mindfulness and resiliency at some point today. And good luck to all of you.
Thank you, Jackie. And this is Adele, and I agree. Thank you so much for participating today. I hope you have a couple walkaways that are going to help you kind of build your resilience and enforce your well-being. And if you have questions as you go through, I believe our contact information is associated with this webinar. And so feel free to reach out and have a wonderful day.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Jackie and Adele, for such an excellent presentation today, and to our audience for participating. Please enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to having you join us for future webinars.